Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine opening a book, maybe turning towards the back, looking for the glossary. You expect that simple alphabetical list of definitions, right?
Oh, the standard appendix.
Exactly. But now, imagine finding something. Well, something that feels alive.
Hmm.
That's really the core idea we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
It's drawn from these excerpts of The Living Glossary of Global Leadership by Oliver Werner Nightingale, who also goes by Lóng Tíng.
And his perspective is quite different. He doesn't see a glossary as just, an appendix or some dry reference list.
Not at all. He actually describes it as a field of resonance, a memory of meaning.
Wow.
Yeah, and a way of saying, this is how we speak, and this is what we mean when we speak it. I mean, right from the start, that completely challenges how we normally think about a glossary.
It really does. And we should probably mention the context here, because the source material frames this glossary as part of a bigger picture. It's presented as potentially part of a series called Global Leadership Insights 2030. And the focus seems to be very much on bridging East and West.
Ah, right. Through leadership and cultural empathy. That's key.
Exactly. So this glossary isn't operating in a vacuum. It's meant to be, perhaps, a foundational language for a very specific kind of leadership, one that's visionary, cross-cultural, empathetic.
So the main idea the author's putting forward is that this isn't static. It's not something finalized and tacked on at the end.
Right. It's presented as something different, almost unexpected. Something that didn't just sort of come out of the writing process, but actually shaped it.
Yeah, actively shaped it. It sounds like it's deeply connected to the actual act of leading, especially in this global sense, seeing language itself as this dynamic force.
Which brings us to what we want to do in this deep dive. We really need to explore why. Why does the author see this glossary as alive? How is that different?
And how is it structured? Because it's explicitly not alphabetical.
Exactly. We need to look at that structure, these clusters he talks about, and unpack the key concepts grouped within them.
Ultimately, we want to get a handle on what this approach means for how we understand leadership, how we talk about it, maybe even how we practice it in this complex world we're in.
So let's start right there with that opening salvo, a glossary that's more than just definitions.
Yes. The source lays it out so clearly. A glossary is not an appendix. It's a field of resonance, a memory of meaning. Let's just sit with field of resonance for a second. What does that feel like? How does that change what a glossary is?
Well, resonance makes you think of vibrations, doesn't it? Echoes, things affecting each other, even across distance.
Yeah, not isolated points.
Exactly. A typical glossary is like separate definitions, dots on a page. But a field of resonance that suggests the terms inside it are connected. They vibrate against each other. Their meanings influence each other, enrich each other.
So it's a dynamic space.
I think so. Where definitions aren't just fixed points, but they're alive with context, with history, with potential. It's not just what a word means, but maybe how it connects, how it feels within this whole web of language and ideas.
And a memory of meaning. I find that phrase really beautiful. It suggests it's not just the current definition, but it holds the history of the word.
Yes, how it's been used, how it's evolved, maybe even the struggles around its meaning.
That seems crucial for leadership terms, especially global ones.
Absolutely. Meanings don't just appear, do they? They gather layers over time through different cultures, historical moments. You take a word like, say, empowerment.
Okay.
Its memory of meaning might be quite corporate in one context, but maybe in another, it's deeply tied to political liberation movements. Recognizing that memory, that history, allows for a much richer, much more sensitive understanding.
So defining becomes almost an act of remembering.
Yeah, a historical act, not just stating a fact.
The author even shares a bit about their own process writing this. They expected it to be, and I'm quoting, a quiet, final section, a reference, a list.
The standard expectation.
Right. But then something shifted. The source says it began to breathe, to shape the chapters it followed.
Now that's interesting. It implies the glossary wasn't just reflecting the terms used in the main text.
No, it was influencing it. The very act of defining these specific terms somehow changed the direction or the substance of the book itself.
That's a powerful reversal, isn't it? It speaks to the, I guess, the generative power of language, of defining things.
How so?
Well, by really grappling with what these leadership terms mean, especially in this ethical global context,
Yeah.
the definitions themselves seem to have clarified things, maybe challenged assumptions, and ultimately steered the bigger story.
So defining isn't just descriptive, it's formative.
Exactly. creative even. The glossary wasn't just passive, it became an active force in the writing.
And that active formative quality leads to what might be the most potent idea here. Words are not just tools, they are territories.
That one really lands. Let's think about that distinction. Tools versus territories.
Okay, a tool, like a hammer.
Right. It's functional. You pick it up, use it, put it down. Pretty neutral, really.
But a territory?
A territory is a space. It has boundaries, maybe a history, inhabitants, resources. It might even be contested ground.
So when words are territories,
It means they're these complex spaces of meaning. They're not neutral instruments you just wield.
and the source elaborates right away. Territories carry systems, worldviews, pain, possibility, responsibility. That's a lot for one word to carry.
It is. Think about a word like justice. It's not just its dictionary entry, is it?
No.
It's a territory shaped by centuries of philosophy, law, social struggles, personal experiences of fairness or unfairness. It carries entire worldviews within it.
And evoking pain or possibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And using that word or defining it comes with responsibility. You're stepping onto that territory, acknowledging its past, maybe influencing its future. It's so much more than just finding the right synonym.
So why is this view words as territories so critical for leadership, particularly global leadership?
Well, leaders work through language all the time, don't they? Articulating a vision, setting strategy, building culture, resolving conflicts, connecting with really diverse groups.
It's their main medium in many ways.
If words are territories, then a leader's language choice becomes an act of navigating these territories, maybe claiming them, maybe showing respect for them.
So using a term rooted in one culture without realizing its history elsewhere.
Could unintentionally exclude or offend. Introducing a new term might be like planting a flag in a new conceptual space.
Understanding that words carry systems, worldviews, even pain, that demands a lot of awareness from a leader.
Immense sensitivity, I'd say, and intentionality.
Yeah.
Because the same word can land so differently, carry such different weight, and different cultural territories.
So ignoring the territorial nature of words isn't just a communication mistake.
It can be a real leadership failure. Defining terms, or even deciding not to use certain terms, becomes a significant act of leadership in itself.
Like mapping the crucial areas.
Exactly. Mapping, negotiating, maybe even stewarding the shared understanding. The glossary, then, isn't a list. It's a map of these vital territories leaders need to navigate responsibly.
Which connects to the idea that this glossary is framed not as definition, but as invitation.
Yes, an invitation to step into these territories, to explore them.
Not just to learn the definition and move on.
Right, it's an invitation to engage with this.
Mm-hmm.
What does the source call it? A lexicon of leadership, rooted in ethics, empathy, and global memory. It's asking the leader, or anyone reading it, to explore the history, the feeling, the ethical weight, the cultural context inside these words.
An ongoing discovery.
A dialogue, not a dictation.
Okay, so if they didn't just alphabetize these territories, how did they organize them? What's the structure?
The source says the author clustered, curated, and composed a glossary like one might compose music.
Compose music. That's a fascinating metaphor. What does that imply?
Well, musical composition isn't usually about alphabetical order, is it? It's about themes, harmony, counterpoint, emotional flow. So composing the glossary suggests grouping terms thematically, creating a certain resonance or relationship between the concepts within each group.
And the source adds each group a different tone, a different part of the leadership body.
Yeah, that reinforces it. The structure itself is meant to represent different dimensions, different facets of leadership seen through this particular lens.
So the clusters are like curated collections.
That's a good way to put it. Curated collections that resonate together, creating a specific tone or focusing on a particular part of what this ethical global leadership looks like. It moves away from just analysis and separation towards something more holistic, more interconnected.
Like instruments in an orchestra contributing to the whole piece.
Exactly. It's a deliberate, maybe even artistic choice about how to structure this knowledge.
All right, this feels like where we really get into the substance. The source outlines 8 distinct clusters. These are the different tones or parts of the leadership body.
Let's dive into each one. Explore the themes, the specific terms listed, and try to understand what each cluster reveals about this particular vision of leadership. This seems to be the heart of the living glossary.
Agreed. Each cluster is like a curated territory of meaning, understanding what's grouped together and why. That's key to grasping this whole approach.
Okay, first up is Cluster 1, Inner Leadership and Mindfulness. The source sets the mood, saying these words breathe from within. It's about where leadership feels.
And the description highlights presence is power, doubt is sacred, breath is practice. The specific terms listed for this cluster are inner compass, leadership hesitations, emotional resilience, 30-second reflection.
Now that feels maybe a bit counterintuitive. For global leadership, you might think first of external action, big strategies, presence on a world stage. Why start here with the inner self?
I think the placement, putting it first, makes a strong statement. It suggests that leadership, especially in these really complex, uncertain global settings, is fundamentally an inside job.
Meaning your external actions, how you show up as a leader, are basically a reflection of your internal state. Your clarity, your biases, how you handle stress, your capacity for empathy, all that stuff.
So navigating huge cultural differences or geopolitical pressures.
Requires a stable, self-aware core. Think about presence as power. In a world that's so full of noise and distraction, true presence, just being fully attentive and aware in the moment, that's actually a rare and powerful thing for a leader. It lets you truly listen, pick up on subtle cues, project calm when everything's chaotic.
And that presence isn't just charisma.
No, the source implies it's more about grounded awareness, something you cultivate internally.
What about doubt as sacred? That really pushes against the idea of the all-knowing, super confident leader.
It does. Conventional leadership stories often praise decisiveness, unwavering certainty. But let's be honest, in a truly complex, volatile world, a VUCA world, as they say, absolute certainty can be naive, even dangerous.
Doubt isn't weakness here.
No, framing it as sacred suggests it's more like a signal, a wise caution. It prompts you to dig deeper, to be humble, to seek out different perspectives. For a global leader facing problems with so many facets, doubt can actually prevent huge missteps based on just one cultural viewpoint.
And it makes you check your inner compass, another term here.
Exactly, which isn't necessarily a fixed moral code, but maybe that intuitive sense of direction, alignment with your core values, especially when external rules are unclear or conflicting.
Emotional resilience seems a bit more familiar, bouncing back.
It is, but putting it here connects it firmly to that inner landscape. Resilience isn't just about gritting your teeth and pushing through. It's tied to managing your internal emotional responses to stress, to failure, to conflict.
Which must happen constantly in global roles.
All the time. Misunderstandings, frustrations due to cultural gaps, high stakes. Developing that resilience lets a leader respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting when things inevitably go sideways.
And the last one, 30-second reflection. Sounds tiny.
Which links right back to breath as practice. It suggests that even these very short, deliberate moments, just pausing, checking in internally, maybe focusing on your breath for half a minute, can be incredibly powerful.
Or what?
For regaining presence, managing emotions, maybe recalibrating that inner compass right in the middle of a crazy day. This whole cluster basically argues that the most effective global leadership has to start with deep self-awareness and the discipline of cultivating inner stability.
Leading from a grounded place.
Exactly. Not just performing leadership on the outside. It fundamentally connects inner well-being to outer effectiveness and ethical choices.
It really does shift the starting point. The leader as a cultivated self, first and foremost.
The inner world as the first territory to understand and steward. Yes.
Okay, moving outwards then. Cluster 2 is global and intercultural leadership. The description says this holds words that stretch across borders.
Right, so this cluster tackles the challenge of leading in a world full of difference head-on. The description talks about engaging with the soil of difference and building the bridge between them.
And emphasizing complexity, not flattening it.
Yes, honoring complexity. The terms listed are decolonial leadership, diaspora wisdom, intercultural competence, quantum leadership.
Okay, decolonial leadership and diaspora wisdom immediately jump out as not being standard corporate leadership terms. Why are they seen as crucial here, especially for bridging East and West, as the context suggests?
Well, they bring in a critical awareness of history and lived experience that, frankly, a lot of traditional leadership models just ignore. Decolonial leadership explicitly challenges approaches that might even unconsciously keep colonial power dynamics going.
Oh, so?
Assumptions of Western superiority may be marginalizing non-Western ways of knowing. Decolonial leadership calls for awareness of these historical power imbalances and actively working against them in global interactions, making sure voices are heard equitably.
Which is fundamental if you actually want to bridge East and West authentically.
Absolutely. It means acknowledging the historical pain that language and systems can carry, linking back to that idea of words as territories.
And diaspora wisdom? That sounds intriguing.
It's a really rich concept.
Yeah.
It recognizes that people living in diaspora, communities scattered from their homeland, often develop unique insights from navigating multiple cultures, languages, identities. They literally embody the bridge.
So leaders tapping into that.
Aren't just being inclusive in a token way, they're accessing a vital source of knowledge about cultural translation, resilience, adaptation, understanding how global flows really work. It values lived experience from outside the dominant centers as a source of real strategic and ethical insight.
Intercultural competence is maybe more familiar, but how does it fit in this context?
It seems deeper here. Placed alongside decolonial thinking and diaspora wisdom, intercultural competence isn't just about knowing etiquette, the do's and don'ts. It's more about the ability to genuinely understand, respect, and navigate the really complex terrain of cultural difference. Informed by that historical awareness and the value of diverse perspectives, it feels like a skill rooted in humility, in continuous learning. Less about mastering other cultures, maybe more about mastering the process of engaging across cultures with empathy.
Okay, then we have quantum leadership. That sounds like it's from physics, not leadership studies. How does that stretch across borders?
It's definitely suggestive, and the source doesn't spell it out fully. But putting it together with the other terms, well, quantum physics deals with things like nonlinearity, deep interconnectedness, things existing in multiple states at once.
Okay.
So maybe quantum leadership in this context implies the ability to perceive and act within these complex interconnected global systems where cause and effect aren't straightforward, where paradoxes are everywhere, and where multiple realities coexist.
Seeing the world less as separate countries interacting.
And more as a single complex entangled system, where an action here might have unpredictable effects way over there. It could be calling for a leader's mindset to be as complex and interconnected as the global reality itself, embracing ambiguity, finding ways to lead across boundaries that maybe aren't as solid as they look.
So this cluster really pushes beyond just managing cultural differences. It's about rethinking leadership from a place that owns history, values different kinds of knowledge, and embraces global complexity.
It feels like a call for leadership that's truly globally fluent, historically conscious, and agile enough for a nonlinear world.
Moving on to Cluster 3. Earth, Social Justice, and Inclusion. The source notes this one does not speak quietly. It echoes centuries of resistance and dares to define liberation in leadership terms.
That's strong language. And the terms here are belonging, intersectionality, radical empathy, surveillance culture. As you said, these are inherently social, even political terms, explicitly linking leadership to societal structures, power dynamics, and calls for equity.
Including them here seems like a statement in itself. It suggests leadership, in this view, can't be separated from its social impact.
Exactly. It argues that leadership isn't value neutral when it comes to power, privilege, marginalization. It insists that effective ethical leadership has to actively engage with the social realities people face and the broader systems involved.
Let's take belonging. How is that framed as a leadership outcome?
It's presented as a core goal. Leaders should strive to create environments where everyone feels not just physically present, but safe, respected, fully included. It's deeper than just diversity stats. It's about psychological safety, acceptance.
And intersectionality, how does that play into a leader's role?
Well, intersectionality, the concept from Kimberly Crenshaw, explains how different social identities, race, gender, class, disability, etc., overlap and create unique experiences of discrimination or privilege.
Right.
For a leader, understanding this is crucial. It helps you recognize that people aren't just one thing, and policies that seem fair might actually harm or exclude people at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. If you ignore intersectionality, you're missing a huge part of the picture of inequity.
Then there's radical empathy. That sounds more intense than just empathy.
It suggests something deeper, perhaps more challenging. Maybe it's empathy that goes beyond just feeling for someone to actively trying to understand the lived experience of others, especially those very different from you or shaped by systemic disadvantage.
Requiring deep listening.
Deep listening, vulnerability, maybe a commitment to see the world through their eyes, even when it's uncomfortable, or forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about power and privilege. It feels like an active, maybe even politically conscious form of empathy.
And how does surveillance culture fit in this cluster about belonging and empathy?
Its inclusion is really telling, isn't it? Surveillance culture, This pervasive monitoring, whether by governments, companies, or even socially, can fundamentally undermine trust, authenticity, safety.
The foundations of belonging.
Precisely.
Hmm.
So leaders today face this challenge. How do you foster genuine connection and open communication when people might fear being watched, judged, having their data misused? It highlights a very contemporary barrier to true inclusion and reminds us that social justice issues now absolutely extend into the digital realm.
So this cluster basically says leaders have a responsibility to tackle systemic issues and create spaces where people can feel liberated from oppression.
Yes, whether that oppression is historical, social, or digital. It expands the leader's responsibility way beyond just organizational boundaries into the broader social context.
Demanding leadership that's ethically grounded and actively works for equity, recognizing that just doing nothing is also a choice.
A form of complicity, perhaps. Yes.
Okay, cluster 4 is Sadald, spiritual and ethical concepts. The theme is described as whispers between worlds, talking about codes that lead when no one's watching. And there's that powerful quote, "Beyond strategy lies spirit."
The terms here are trust agreements, sacred activism, ethical silence, legacy leadership. This cluster definitely connects leadership to deeper ethical or maybe even spiritual foundations, moving beyond just the pragmatic.
Beyond strategy lies spirit. That's a big claim. What does it suggest about the limits of purely rational leadership?
It suggests strategy is essential, sure, but it's not enough. Especially for truly meaningful leadership in complex, ethically messy situations, there needs to be a deeper wellspring of guidance, resilience, motivation, what the source calls spirit.
Which could mean different things to different people.
Absolutely. Personal values, a sense of purpose beyond yourself, commitment to ethical principles, maybe even a spiritual practice. It points to those internal codes that lead when no one's watching, the integrity that guides you when there's no external checklist or supervisor.
Trust agreements placed here feels significant. What kind of agreements are we talking about?
Likely not just formal contracts.
Yeah.
Placing it in this spiritual ethical cluster suggests understandings built on a level of trust that goes deeper, more relational, maybe like deeply held promises or vows between people or groups.
Why is that important for a leader?
Building and honoring those kinds of deep trust agreements is probably foundational for fostering real loyalty, commitment, collaboration, especially in contexts where maybe legal frameworks are weak or cultural norms really prioritize relational trust over formal structures.
And sacred activism. How can activism be sacred in leadership?
It suggests the work of leading change can be fueled by a profound moral imperative, a spiritual calling even. It elevates the effort beyond just political tactics or transactional deals to something with deeper meaning.
So the motivation comes from deeply held values.
Yes, seeing the work as serving a higher good, contributing to something transcendent beyond just immediate self-interest or the organization's bottom line. It links leadership action directly to ethical conviction.
Now, ethical silence seems counterintuitive. Leaders are supposed to communicate, right?
This is one of the most provocative terms, I think. Ethical silence isn't just an absence of sound. It's a deliberate, principled choice not to speak or act sometimes.
Why would a leader do that ethically?
Maybe to create space for marginalized voices to finally be heard, linking back to social justice. Or to avoid adding fuel to a harmful narrative. Or to signal protest. Or simply to allow for deep listening and discernment, recognizing not every impulse needs voicing, not every situation needs an immediate reaction.
So knowing when not to speak is also leadership.
And that silence itself can be a powerful ethical tool. Yes.
Finally, legacy leadership. This ties it all to the long view.
It does. It's leadership focused on enduring impact, not just this quarter's results, or even the 5-year plan.
Thinking beyond.
Thinking about the long-term ethical, social, environmental consequences. Actively trying to leave something positive, something sustainable for those who come after. It's leadership, driven by that sense of stewardship for the future, guided by the spirit that lies beyond just immediate strategy.
This cluster really adds a layer of profound meaning, suggesting the most impactful leadership is fueled by purpose and an inner ethical compass.
It reminds us the leader is a moral agent whose impact is measured not just in outcomes, but in the values they embody and the future they help shape.
Okay, next is cluster 5, digitality and future technologies. The source calls this the rhythm of now, says the future is coded, and crucially, ethics is not optional.
This cluster takes us right into the thick of the digital age, and the source uses that striking comparison. Leadership must know the language of firewalls as well as forgiveness.
Firewalls and forgiveness. That juxtaposition really hits hard. It forces you to hold the technical and the human together. Why is that so essential for leaders now?
Because the digital world isn't just technical infrastructure. It's a deeply human space. Our interactions there have real ethical weight, and the potential for harm or good is massive. Leaders need to grasp things like encryption, not just technically, but as tools that protect privacy and build trust, which are core ethical issues.
And the zero trust mindset, that's another term listed.
Right. In cybersecurity, that means basically verifying every access attempt, assuming nothing is automatically trustworthy just because it's inside the network. Technically, it's about security. But it also raises huge questions about human trust in digital spaces. How do you build relationships when the underlying system operates on an assumption of zero trust?
And that needs balancing with forgiveness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Acknowledging errors happen, trust gets breached sometimes, digitally, just like physically. There has to be space for reconciliation, for learning from mistakes. It can't just be rigid systems.
AI authorship is another one. That opens up a whole ethical can of worms.
Doesn't it just jerk? As AI generates text, images, code, who's the author? Who's responsible if the output is biased or harmful or infringes copyright? Leaders need to navigate the ethics of using AI, demanding transparency, watching for bias, understanding the potential for misuse. It challenges fundamental ideas about creativity, ownership, accountability.
And the last term, digital vulnerability, that feels like a baseline condition for everyone now.
It does. And including it in a leadership glossary acknowledges that leading today requires managing this inherent state. We're all vulnerable individuals, organizations to data breaches, misinformation, cyber attacks, the psychological toll of being always online.
So what's the leader's role regarding that vulnerability?
Cultivating resilience against it, protecting people's digital well-being, making ethical choices about data privacy and security. This cluster basically argues that digital literacy for leaders isn't just tech know-how. It's understanding the ethical landscape and the human impact of living and leading in this digitally saturated world.
It really shows how fast the scope of leadership is expanding, demanding this navigation of complex ethical terrain created by tech.
And it underlines that digital fluency is useless, maybe even dangerous, without a strong ethical compass. Technology just amplifies our capabilities and our responsibilities.
Cluster 6 is a knowledge, language, and narrative. Key phrases here. Stories shape systems. Silence can be structural. Naming is never neutral.
This cluster really zooms in on the power dynamics embedded in how we create, share, and control knowledge, and the ethics around language itself. The terms listed are epistemic injustice, narrative ownership, plain language ethics.
Stories shape systems. How does that connect directly to leadership?
Leaders are constantly shaping narratives, aren't they? The story of the organization's purpose, its past, its challenges, its future. These stories aren't just fluff. They actively create the culture, set priorities, influence how people see things inside and outside.
So the stories we tell determine what's valued.
And who's seen as important? What's considered possible? Leaders need to be incredibly aware of this narrative power and wield it responsibly.
And silence can be structural. What does that mean?
It means that when certain voices or perspectives are missing, it's not always just an accident. It can be built into the very structures of how we communicate, how power works. Systems can silence people by devaluing their knowledge, excluding them from key conversations, or just making it unsafe to speak up.
So leaders need to actively dismantle those structures.
If they're serious about inclusion, yes. Identify and challenge those structures of silence.
And naming is never neutral.
Every time we name something, define a problem, label a group, coin a term for a new project, that act carries power and often bias. The words we choose can reinforce existing power structures or challenge them. Think about how certain labels for communities can perpetuate stereotypes. Leaders have to be mindful that their language choices have real ethical weight.
This sounds directly related to epistemic injustice. What exactly is that, and how would a leader address it?
Epistemic injustice is basically a wrong done to someone in their capacity as a knower, as someone who understands or communicates things. There are broadly two types.
Okay.
Testimonial injustice is when you unfairly dismiss someone's word or knowledge because of prejudice, like ignoring a junior person's idea because of their rank or background. Hermeneutical injustice is when someone lacks the shared concepts to even make sense of their own experience. Think about workplace harassment before the term and concept became widely understood. People knew something was wrong, but lacked the collective language to name it.
So how does a leader fight that?
By actively creating environments where everyone's voice and knowledge are valued, regardless of status or identity, challenging your own biases about who counts as credible, and ensuring the language needed to understand shared experiences, especially experiences of unfairness, is available and usable, making sure the system doesn't structurally silence people or devalue their ways of knowing.
And narrative ownership, how does that fit?
It's about who gets to tell the story, especially the story of their own experiences, their community, their history. In a world where dominant narratives often sideline or misrepresent certain groups, leadership involves respecting and empowering people to own and share their own stories.
Not imposing one top-down narrative.
Exactly. Facilitating platforms for diverse stories to emerge and be heard.
And plain language ethics seems like a very practical outcome of all this.
It does. After digging into the complexities of knowledge, narrative, and injustice, this is a call to make ethical principles themselves accessible, understandable to everyone.
Getting ethics out of jargon-filled documents.
Right. Pushing back against ethics being some abstract philosophy only experts can decipher. Leaders have a responsibility to translate complex ethical ideas into clear, actionable language that can actually guide behavior for everyone, making ethical leadership something people can grasp and practice.
This cluster makes a powerful case that language isn't just for conveying information. It's a site of power. It shapes reality, and handling it ethically is core to leadership.
It argues that mastering language as a leader isn't just about being articulate. It's about a deep ethical awareness of how words create, include, exclude, and empower.
Moving to Cluster 7, LQ's transformative and collective processes. The theme is leadership in movement, focusing on listening, co-creating, regenerating. And the source contrasts this with rigid methods, saying it's not method, but embodied responsibility.
This cluster signals a real shift from the hero-leader model towards leadership as something more distributed, relational, dynamic. The terms are micro-cases, distributed leadership, restorative practices, systemic healing.
Not method, but embodied responsibility. What's the core difference there?
Well, a method sounds like a recipe, right? A set of steps you follow. Embodied responsibility feels much more integrated, more personal. It implies that taking responsibility for the collective process isn't just a task you perform. It's something you inhabit. It's part of how you show up. Leadership here isn't just applying the right technique. It's being fully present in the process, taking genuine ownership for fostering that listening, co-creation, regeneration. It's a way of being in collective action.
And distributed leadership fits right into that.
Perfectly. It acknowledges that in any complex system, a company, a community, a movement leadership isn't just in the formal roles. It's spread out. Functions are performed by many people.
So effective leadership is about enabling that.
Recognizing, enabling, empowering those multiple points of leadership. Fostering shared ownership and agency. Leading more through influence and facilitation than just top-down command.
What about microcases? How do they relate to collective processes?
Microcases could refer to using small, immediate, real-life situations for collective learning. Instead of big, abstract case studies, maybe the group pauses to dissect a specific interaction, a challenge, a success that just happened within the team.
Learning in movement.
Exactly. It fosters continuous learning grounded in actual shared experience, using collaborative sense-making right there and then.
And then we have restorative practices and systemic healing, which bring in this element of repair.
Definitely. Restorative practices, which often come from justice contexts but can be used anywhere there's conflict, focus on repairing harm and rebuilding relationships. They typically involve dialogue, mutual understanding, bringing affected parties together.
So leadership involves facilitating healing.
Including this term suggests yes. Addressing conflict and harm in ways that actually strengthen the group's fabric, rather than just punishing or separating.
And systemic healing takes that even further.
It implies the leadership process might need to tackle harm or dysfunction embedded in the system itself, maybe connecting back to structural silence or injustice we talked about earlier. It's about mending broken systems, addressing root causes of conflict or inequity, fostering regeneration not just between people, but throughout the whole structure.
This cluster really paints a picture of leadership as fostering collective responsibility, learning, healing, continuous evolution.
It's leadership as a process embedded in the shared life of the group.
Which sounds very different from the leader as the sole director. More like a facilitator, a gardener, maybe a healer.
I like that. A nurturing, enabling force focused on the health and capacity of the whole collective, recognizing that real transformation is a shared journey.
Okay, the final cluster, Cluster 8, is embodiment, somatics, and presence. This feels like it gets very personal again, talking about leading with bodies, nervous systems, even tremors, pulses, and stillness.
It brings us back inside, but with a specific focus on the physical, the felt sense of leading. The source emphasizes to lead is not only to act, but to feel with awareness. The terms are embodied clicks, somatic intelligence, digital pause points.
This really does feel like the most alive cluster, connecting leadership right to our physical selves. What does it actually mean, though, to lead with your body or nervous system?
It means recognizing leadership isn't purely cognitive or strategic, it's deeply physical. Our bodies, our nervous systems, they're constantly taking in information from our surroundings, from our interactions, often much faster than our conscious minds register.
So somatic intelligence is tuning into that.
Yes, it's the capacity to access and use that bodily wisdom. Paying attention to physical sensations that knot in your stomach, the tension in your shoulders, a feeling of ease, your energy levels, those gut feelings, treating them as valid data points.
How does that help a leader?
Developing somatic intelligence means understanding how stress shows up physically, how your own nervous system state affects the people around you, co-regulation or triggering, how your physical presence, your posture, impacts communication and trust. It's leading with awareness of the body's signals, not just thoughts and plans.
Embodied clicks is such an unusual term, linking the digital back to the physical again.
It seems so. In this world where we're clicking and typing constantly, we can feel really disconnected from our bodies. Embodied clicks might refer to noticing the physical sensations or intuitive responses that go along with our digital actions.
Right.
That tension you feel after doom scrolling. Or maybe a sense of rightness when you hit send on something important. Or that subtle yes or no feeling in your gut during a video call negotiation. It's a reminder that even when we act through technology, our bodies are still reacting, still giving us feedback.
So a leader with somatic awareness notices these clicks.
Notices them in themselves, maybe even picks up cues from others, even virtually, recognizing these physical signals as part of the whole communication picture.
And digital pause points. That seems essential given everything else.
It directly addresses the challenges raised by embodied clicks and also digital vulnerability back in Cluster 5. Digital pause points are intentional breaks, moments or practices designed to step away from the constant digital stream.
To do what?
To reconnect with your physical self, regulate your nervous system, allow for reflection. Could be anything, a real screen break, mindful breathing like in Cluster 1, walking outside, something grounding.
And leaders need to model this.
Model it and encourage it to combat digital burnout, maintain presence, make sure technology is serving well-being, not destroying it. This cluster really insists that truly effective leadership has to acknowledge and care for the physical, embodied reality of everyone involved, especially now.
It brings it all back to the human foundation. Leadership is lived through our physical being.
It's a call for leadership that's grounded, that listens to the body's wisdom and intentionally fosters physical and mental well-being right alongside strategic objectives.
Wow. Okay, looking back across all 8 clusters, inner leadership, global intercultural, social justice, spiritual ethical, digitality, knowledge narrative, collective processes, and embodiment, it's incredibly clear. This glossary is absolutely not just a list.
No way. It's a complex, deeply interconnected map of what ethical, empathetic, global leadership looks like through this very specific, very thoughtful lens.
It makes the author's description, this glossary is not dead ink, it's alive, feel completely earned.
Absolutely. And it functions, as the source suggests, like a map, guiding us through these different dimensions. Maybe a ritual in the sense of needing conscious engagement with the meaning, and definitely a reflection, prompting ongoing thought about our own leadership.
And that idea that it grows as we grow, it's designed to evolve.
Which is essential, isn't it? For a living glossary in a world that changes so fast. As leaders evolve, as the global context shifts, the language we use has to evolve too. These definitions aren't endpoints, they're starting points.
The concluding thoughts in the source really hammer home the connection between language and impact. What we define reveals what we defend.
That's powerful. It suggests the concepts we take the time to really articulate, to give meaning to. Those are the things we'll actually prioritize and protect through our actions. Definitions become declarations of what truly matters to us.
Then what we include reflects what we imagine.
Yeah, the breadth and depth of the terms we embrace in our leadership vocabulary says so much about the kind of world or organization we're trying to build. If our language is narrow, maybe our imagination is too, including challenging terms like these. It implies we're imagining something more just, more connected, more ethically aware.
And the weight of that final piece. And what we speak into the world can either harm or heal.
That puts the ultimate ethical responsibility right on language. Every word a leader uses, every story they tell, every definition they accept, it has potential consequences.
Building bridges or
Yeah.
walls.
Fostering understanding or sowing division. Validating people or erasing them. It places this profound ethical weight on using language consciously, empathetically, aware of its power to contribute to well-being or cause real damage. It makes words as territories feel incredibly real and human.
So the author isn't just giving us this glossary to study. The invitation is to approach it not as a student, but as a steward.
That's a call to active, responsible engagement, isn't it? A student learns from it, a steward cared for it, tends it, keeps it relevant, helps it grow. It's an invitation to participate in the ongoing life of this language.
And they explicitly ask us, the listeners, to engage personally. The first question posed is, how do these terms shift in your culture?
Which is so vital for global leadership. It's a direct acknowledgement that even these carefully chosen terms aren't universal monoliths. How is belonging understood differently?
Yeah.
Or trust? Or even leadership hesitations? It pushes us to apply that crucial intercultural lens to the glossary itself.
Then what is missing?
A direct invitation to contribute. It acknowledges no lexicon is ever complete. What other perspectives, concepts, terms, maybe from experiences or cultures not fully captured here, are needed? It empowers you, the listener, to identify gaps and help evolve the language.
And looking forward. And what new language might rise in the wake of what we've lived.
That's about recognizing that shared experiences, especially big global events or crises, forge new realities. And those new realities demand new ways of talking about them, new language for leadership. It positions our lived experience as a source of linguistic innovation.
Because, as the author wraps up, leadership, too, is a language.
And maybe the most empowering part of that conclusion is the very last line. And your voice is part of it.
It brings it right back to each of us. We're not just passive recipients of this leadership language. We're active participants in creating it, shaping it, evolving it. Our voices, our definitions, our stories matter.
It's a really powerful call to be conscious communicators, ethical stewards of the words we use around leadership. Recognizing this language is a shared territory, and we all have a hand in shaping what it looks like and what it does in the world.
This deep dive into the living glossary has definitely shifted my perspective on what defining terms can mean for leadership. It's not dry semantics. It's about engaging with words as dynamic territories, full of history and power.
And recognizing that how we engage with that language, how we define and include and speak, is an ethical act with real potential to shape the future, for harm or for healing.
That's a potent thought to carry forward, the responsibility inherent in our words.